Hello. Thanks to everybody for coming. Thanks to the panel. I have probably the easiest job of anyone here today because I have three truly stellar panelists who can look at this issue from various sides, from the business angle, from sort of the high-level geostrategic political angle, and from the political congressional level. So I'm very eager to hear from them and eager to stop talking. So let's get going. Let's begin with Jeremy, who actually works in the tech space, works in AI, and I don't, and I suspect most of us don't. So I think it would be useful if you could start with giving us sort of a technological overview of what exactly we're talking about when we say AI, when we say 5G.
Sure. So two disclaimers. I watched the videos that were playing before I walked out here. I'm not based in Silicon Valley. I'm not from one of these big tech companies that hates America. So let me make that clear. Two, I'll start by explaining 5G, and another disclaimer, I'm not a 5G expert, but I do have a cell phone. I think most of you guys have cell phones. So, and most of you can remember when we had 3G, and I don't know what was before the Edge, and those horrible networks. So the 5G is really, it's going to be a step up from 4G, but if you remember the step we made from 3G to 4G and how much faster your phone was, it's going to be a much bigger jump than that. So picture, I have to go jump on a flight after this to Europe, and it'd be great if I could download some TV shows. With 5G, I could download an entire season of Game of Thrones in 30 seconds and just jump on my flight. 30 seconds, entire season of Game of Thrones, or whatever show you want, right? The other thing about 5G is latency. So latency is how quickly can devices communicate with each other. And the quickness of communication between devices on 5G is less than human reaction time, which makes everything effectively real time. So you can picture someone controlling a robot in real time, doing surgery, or cars communicating with each other, moving around at high speeds. That all becomes possible with 5G. And it also makes it possible for many, many more devices to be on a single network, communicating with each other. And that makes many, many more opportunities for bad actors to steal data or do worse. Okay? So that's 5G. AI, we have to kind of break down into two categories. One is the first type of AI, which you all think of when you hear of AI, and if you know the title of this talk is The Terminator. The Terminator AI, that's one version of AI, and it's a real thing that we have to be worried about, sometime probably in the 2030s. But right now, there's another type of AI we call practical AI. So AI is already all around us. It's making decisions in healthcare, and your banking and government. It's protecting us. It's just when a computer makes a decision that normally it would take a human to make that decision, that's what you consider in general AI. So it's already all around us, and the Chinese are making massive investments in both these technologies. And the last thing I'll say is I think you want to think about 5G as a battleground, and kind of the current battleground that we're fighting on right now. But there's going to be many more technological battlegrounds, and I think AI you can think of as a war that we're going to have to win against China.
Gordon, let's stick on 5G for now. So I actually was just in China, and I was reading the local fake news there, and state-owned fake news, and they have story after story on the front pages of the Global Times, et cetera, about Huawei. I mean, they've got a lot of state investment, if kind of surreptitiously so, but they really care that 5G wins this 5G war. The US, of course, also has a 5G company, Qualcomm, which is embroiled in kind of a legal case now, too, which might be weakening its stance against Huawei. So can you talk a little bit about Qualcomm and its sort of battle across the globe with Huawei.
Yeah, the Federal Trade Commission has sued Qualcomm and basically saying it charges too much. And so using some novel legal theories, what the FTC is trying to do is essentially institute price control. In the first day of the trial against Qualcomm, which was early January, the #1 witness on the first day was Huawei Technologies to testify against Qualcomm. Now, this is important because there are only going to be 2 companies that will dominate 5G throughout the world. And it really is that important because it could turn off your pacemaker if they wanted to. And that's Huawei and Qualcomm. Now, I don't think the idea of using new legal theories to attack a US company and then using the Chinese to help you do that is smart, because we don't want the future to be red. We don't want Huawei Technologies absorbing all of the information in the world. And remember, 5G equipment, when you have Huawei in the backbone, the Chinese may be able to take technology, information, data, and ship it all to Beijing. This is what China did between 2012 and 2017 in Addis Ababa, at the headquarters of the African Union. With Huawei equipment, China took all the data out of the AU. So if they do that around the world, they will have, to power their AI systems, they will have every piece of information in the world.
That's scary.
Yeah. So hopefully everyone is now sufficiently terrified. But now the congressman is going to allay our fears by telling us what Congress is doing to fight this menace, right?
If ever there's a cause for optimism, it comes from Congress, right? Well, listen, it's an honor to be here as my first Cpac. This is a critical topic. And I actually think when Congress looks at this, the national security strategy and the national defense strategy are remarkable documents. And I think the Trump administration deserves a lot of credit for these documents because they've shifted the consensus within the national security community. And there is a shared bipartisan consensus right now, at least on the Hill, that China represents the pacing threat. That after 2 decades of counterterrorism dominating the debate, that now we are in the era of great power competition with China. And competition over tech is going to be a huge, if not definitive, part of that struggle. And for that reason, in last year's National Defense Authorization Act, we prohibited the Defense Department from doing business with Huawei and ZTE. The administration's contemplating more aggressive action in that space. We've taken a hard look at, for example, China's 1,000 Talents program that they use to sort of infiltrate our academic community here. Confucius Institutes are part of that. There's a lot of thinking being done on the Hill right now about how do we get ready for this competition. But what I don't think people understand, they have a general sense of, okay, China's doing bad things, China's investing heavily in AI and 5G, but why are they doing that? What is it about the Chinese Communist Party that we should understand in order to respond accordingly? And I think Gordon and I were talking earlier, a lot of this has its roots in the party's origin as an influence organization, as an intelligence organization, as an organization that was very successful in waging an insurgency within China. And a lot of the top leaders today, including General Secretary Xi himself, are the sons of people that were basically espionage and intelligence masters at the origin of the party. And so it shouldn't surprise us that it's not only them trying to exercise via technology total social control domestically, but increasingly trying to export that level of control and influence and corruption in the Indo-Pacific region and around the world. And if we don't win this fight, as Gordon sort of aptly laid out, we are going to be struggling to maintain our leadership. So I would just say to you, I know we're at Cpac. It's easy to spend our time here sort of bashing absurd leftist ideas. And obviously the Democrats are our political opponents in many cases. But for my generation, millennials and Gen Z, I would submit to you that this challenge, figuring out how we push back against the CCP and counter the techno-fascist Maoists in Beijing, that is the real threat that we face right now.
I agree. I think that's a key point where we think about the way the CCP operates at home. I mean, it's a regime that has no respect for the privacy rights of its own citizens. So once that, it's a model that it's perhaps the worst Chinese export would be its ideology.
And look no further than what's happening in Xinjiang, where you have 1 million Uyghurs that are basically in a modern-day concentration camp. If you want a preview of the dystopian sort of future that we're potentially confronted with, but Gordon knows that far better than I do.
Jeremy, as someone who actually works in AI, can you talk a little about how the American landscape in terms of AI investment is versus what you see with our Chinese competition?
Sure. So I could use my company as example. So we're one of the most well-funded AI companies in the U.S., if not the most well-funded. We've raised $225 million. And China, there's some AI companies in China that have raised more than $1 billion or billions of dollars in China. So and we have the history of being able to innovate better than any other country on the planet. But at some point, the sheer amount of dollars going into this and the alignment with not only do they get an investment of $1 billion, but they also get a guaranteed revenue contract from the government for hundreds of millions of dollars. And here we have to make do with $225 million might sound like a lot, but when you're trying to do invent technology that's the equivalent to something like the space race, it's not a lot. And so I think the entire country of China is just aligned in terms of their tech sector, the investors, the government, everybody's there is aligned, and we're busy, just fighting each other about stuff that doesn't matter. And I think AI is AI is a threat. I think we're presenting this as a threat, but I think it's also an opportunity, I think, to pick something like the space race, like the Manhattan Project, where we can kind of, both sides can kind of rally around and actually make progress on something.
Jeremy, you say something really important, and that is, of course, the Chinese have a lead in money. And they've got a lead, certainly, in the state support of AI projects. But the other thing is information. In the type of system that you're talking about, where total control of the state, they have total control of information, which they're going to feed into their AI systems. We're a democracy, so we're just not going to permit that to happen. So China has those natural advantages of money, and you got state control, and you have all of this information that is being fed into the systems, and that gives China an important lead. Now, that's not to say we can't beat them, because we are Americans, but nonetheless, we have to be concerned about the limitations that our form of government imposes on us, and we've got to be just so much better than the Chinese in order to stay ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I saw a video yesterday. It showed what's called a data farm in China. You have thousands of people looking at photos and selecting and saying, that's a car, that's a... And so China is collecting all this data. And I was at a reception last night, and at my table was a guy from a uranium mining company. And I'm like, what are the chances of that, a uranium mining company? I'm already thinking parallels to the Manhattan Project and developing nuclear weapons. And I made the analogy in my head. I said, the uranium, the raw uranium that was required to build the first nuclear weapons, I mean, it's analogous to the data that China's collecting right now too. They know that as these AI systems develop, that the fuel for these AI systems is data. So that's why they're investing in 5G, and they have farms of tens of thousands of humans, creating the data that all these systems are going to learn from.
Congressman, I want to press a little, go deeper on the point that Gordon was making. People like us, and at times rightfully, have ridiculed columnists like Thomas Friedman for, saying how great the Chinese model is. But doesn't it actually provide great advantages? I mean, the Chinese are, for example, willing to lose huge amounts of money on projects that they think are geostrategically important to them. Yeah. We are dominated more by private industry. The Chinese Central Authority is able to direct money towards huge projects in a way that just we simply don't or can't. How do we deal with that challenge?
Sure. Well, I think we have to be honest about the scope of threat that we're facing right now. To me, we're in a moment that's akin to kind of where we were in the late 1940s and early 50s, when our eyes opened and we sort of saw the Iron Curtain descending, and we reorganized our entire national security process to confront the Soviet Union over the long term. The great Wisconsinite George Kennan played a huge role in that. All good things come from Wisconsin. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And
including the Green Bay Packers.
I was going to say, while Jeremy's not an evil Silicon Valley guy, he is an evil Patriots fan.
Oh, God. Not a good time for us.
So one, I mean, let's be clear about the scope of threat we're facing right now, but in terms of organizing to counter it, a few things come to mind. A few sources of inherent advantage that we have that I think we only have ourselves to blame if we screw this up. One is our allies, right? You have Chinese academics that have been writing op-eds, I think one in the New York Times in 2011, that really get this point that I think the quote was, the core of competition between the US and China will come down to who has better friendships. We have a network of allies that the Chinese can never hope to counter around the world. We have incredibly complex and interwoven data sharing agreements. We have the Five Eyes partnerships where we share everything when it comes to our intelligence community with certain key countries. We have to have friends in order to win this competition over the world, on the world stage, because we can't do everything by ourselves. The second thing I'd say in response to what Gordon aptly pointed out is I think there's a tendency when we see the Chinese investing all this money in AI, going around the world, bribing people around the world, right? Getting other countries in debt traps. We're struggling to keep up. And I think there's a tendency in Congress or more broadly in the government right now to think that we need to figure out a way to out-China China. We're never going to be able to do that, right? We have to bet big on our founding principles and our values, right? Our bottom-up process, right? Empowering the laboratories of democracy to solve problems from the bottom up rather than the hierarchical top-down process we see in China. And therefore, if we continue to drift leftward, if we continue to go down this route of socialism light in America, we will lose this competition without firing a shot. We will defeat ourselves far sooner than any member of the Chinese Communist Party will defeat us.
Gordon, it's important that the United States has friends. Does China want friends or does it want supplicants? I mean, how is China behaving on the world stage?
Yeah, China, of course, wants people to be subjects. It doesn't necessarily want friends, Ethan, and this is important. You know, as the Congressman pointed out, we have this network of alliances and friends around the world. China has only one alliance. That's with North Korea. And that one's not working out too well either. But, you know, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has been dropping hints for about 10 years that China is the world's only sovereign state. So if you start from that position, then clearly you are not going to have equal partnerships. You're going to have subjects. And I think, you know, you're absolutely right. This is where our advantage is because we do have these partnerships. We do work with others. The Chinese don't play nice.
Jeremy, I mean, you've expressed to me that you're worried. If we lose, what does the world look like?
Deep breath.
Terminator.
So
the movie.
So I think that if we lose this technological race with AI and 5G being an important battle that we need to win right now, China will basically control the destiny of the world. And then I think to answer the question about what that looks like, I think the U.S. after World War II has been an incredible shepherd of the world, and I don't trust China to be that same shepherd of the people of the world. And if you think back before the U.S. became the dominant power after World War II, the history of the world looks like one country. Whenever a country becomes powerful, it invades its neighbor, takes land, takes wealth, subjugates the people. There's almost no exceptions. One of the reasons why I'm in love with America is I'm aware of the fact that the U.S. it's the first example of a country that became more powerful than anyone around it and didn't use that power to take. I mean, look what we did with Japan and Germany, building them back up right after World War II. And it's never happened before in history that a country did that, and I just don't, And if China is not that, if China is going to follow the pattern of everyone else except the United States in the history of the world and use that power to dominate and subjugate, I think we're going to be in big trouble.
Ethan, many people say that the race for 5G, which is going to be determined in the next 2 or 3 years, really is going to determine the fate of the world for the first half of this century.
Wow. And you agree with that?
I agree with it, because as you could put it together with AI, as Jeremy's been talking about, there's no question that this is going to be where a country acquires data, be able to use it efficiently and effectively. And you know, there are other technologies that are important, of course, but when you talk about 5G and you talk about AI, you've got to understand the combination of that is going to really give a country an enormous lead, such as we've had the lead because we've had 4G and Qualcomm. It's going to be the country that has 5G, and it better not be Huawei if we want to be free.
Can I just quickly add that I think Vice President Pence expressed this perfectly in Munich when he said, we cannot ensure the defense of the West if our allies are dependent on the East. And that is precisely what's playing out over the next few years.
So the U.S. has effectively blocked Huawei, but many other countries have not. I mean, even Canada, which is currently being subject to a really despicable bullying campaign by China, including the summary arrest of some of its citizens, has not. I mean, they're entertaining the possibility of allowing Huawei to install equipment in Canada, and other countries are too. So who's winning now, and why? What is the pitch that Huawei is making that is appealing to countries that you would think would otherwise know better? Anyone can answer this that wants to.
Let me just start by saying, and I'll defer to the real experts, Huawei right now is taking advantage of the swampiness of the swamp. Huawei is offering all expense-paid trips to China for American journalists, for all sorts of people that live here in the swamp. And let me just venture a guess that they're not going to get sort of a realistic picture of the Chinese Communist Party when they take that visit. And so that's something we need to be very carefully aware of when we analyze sort of things that pop up in the press. I mean, there's a whole propaganda system that's at play here, and a foreign influence operation that is affecting our own democracy here in the United States.
Yeah, Ethan, I think that it's very cheap equipment. It can be cheap equipment because the Chinese government subsidizes Huawei. Huawei itself has stolen technology from Cisco Systems and from a whole raft of Western companies. So of course its research and development costs are close to zero. And when you put that together with Chinese diplomats trying to sell Huawei equipment, that's a powerful combination.
Yeah. Well, we're fast running out of time, so I want to maybe just sort of open it up and ask if anyone has any sort of final points that they didn't get in, but they want to make sure we hear them. So, want to begin, Congressman?
Well, again, thank you for having me here. This is great. I would make the point that you have people in China right now, for leading sort of business people in China, like the founder of JD.com, the e-commerce giant, that's saying, with the technological advances we've made in the last 2 to 3 years, we can finally make communism work where it's failed in the past, right? You have Jack Ma, the founder, the CEO of Alibaba and card-carrying CCP member, saying that with the help of technology, we can finally discover the invisible hand of the market. I mean, these are two dramatically different systems that are going to be in competition for the next 3 decades. So I just would encourage you to start paying attention to the world outside the United States, because this is an existential struggle in my mind, and we just need to remember, of course we're not perfect, but we are the good guys. We are the leader of the free world, and we are the last best hope for the rest of the world.
You know, as both Jeremy and the Congressman have said, it is America's vision that has created this prosperous and free world. And right now, it's being challenged by a closed system. And that closed system believes that we are an existential threat and has been working against us in so many different ways. So we've got no choice but to win this fight.
As someone a lot greater than me said, you know, freedom is always one generation away from extinction. I think that we have to get started right now. I think we have to win this 5G battle, you know, and prevent, you know, the Chinese from powering the 5G and all of our friends, our country friends. And I think we need to, start a Manhattan Project space race, that level of magnitude of a project. We have to get that started right now for AI, because it's going to be too late to catch up soon.
Well, the sign is angry at us, so I think that's about it.
Right.
Thank you to all, and thank you out there as well.
You guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. Thank you.